Hello everyone, my name is Julia and today I'm going to talk to you guys about some misconceptions regarding bilingual students. Now, this made me really question what parents and even some teachers have regarding the misconceptions and fears with bilingual students. Kind of interesting because I was talking to other students around campus where a lot of people would come up and tell me that they wish their parents would always teach them their native language or their mother tongue. And so I asked them again why the parents never did. They came with me with 3 specific reasons. One is that the parents felt like it was not necessary to learn since they're in an English-speaking country. Or 2, they mentioned that their parents fear that teaching their child a different language while mastering their first language will cause a language delay. And 3, they fear that their children will get confused once they start to go to school. Now, what is important to note is that these are misconceptions. Bilingualism does not cause confusion. Many parents will start to believe this when their children start to use words from other languages while speaking another. This is called code switching, and this is actually very common among adults and children. I'm going to bring in a guest who is a bilingual speaker. So I'm going to introduce you guys, Karen. Alright, thank you, Karen, for coming in and talking to us about your bilingual experience and what it means to be a bilingual speaker. Mm-hmm. Now, I've known you for quite a while, and you're actually an international student.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that you had a very interesting background. So can you explain to everyone, like, how you grew up, what languages you were exposed to, what schools you went to?
Yeah, for sure. So I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and I studied in an international school that followed an Ontario curriculum. My first language is actually Japanese. I grew up studying in an international school, and now I'm here in Windsor studying film.
Okay, that's awesome. So I've always thought it was quite interesting because, like, although you lived in Hong Kong,
Yes.
which was, they speak Cantonese, right? But your parents are ethnically Japanese.
Yes.
So in the house you speak Japanese.
Yes.
And then you went to an international school, and in that school you spoke English.
Yes.
I just want to know, so for example, when you went to school,
Yes.
did you know any English, or did you only know how to speak Japanese?
Well, the first international school I went was when I was in kindergarten, so I really don't remember if I already knew English or not, but I'm assuming not because I was, really young.
Right.
And probably my parents only taught me Japanese.
Right.
So,
Do they know how to speak English, or do they only know how to speak Japanese?
well, my dad can speak English, but not really fluently.
Okay.
And my mom, I don't think she can.
No.
I don't think so.
So, realistically, when your parents are talking to each other, when they're talking to you, you're mostly speaking in Japanese.
Correct.
So, you're not really exposed to the English language as often as you would,
Yes.
right? Okay, so, my question is, have you ever felt like when you were in an English-speaking classroom, did you ever struggle to catch up with your peers who could speak English?
Yes, I did experience that because there were times where I knew how to say it in Japanese and not in English, but then I wasn't able to express that and put it in a sentence and tell it to my friends since they didn't know that actual word that I was trying to say. So I did face a struggle with that.
Okay. So you did have a struggle,
Yes.
right? Because you had no exposure to English.
Yes.
Which makes a lot of sense, But once you started to go to this English-speaking kindergarten more frequently, did you feel like your struggle lessened?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because as I got educated in an international school where I was surrounded with English-speaking teachers and friends, I got to use English more often in my daily basis.
Okay, so realistically, although you struggled, which makes sense because, English was not common. You weren't exposed to it.
Exactly.
But while you were exposed to English, you were able to communicate effectively with your peers.
Yes.
Right? And you were able to do it quite quickly, don't you think?
Yeah.
Right? So you struggled in the beginning, but throughout the years, or even throughout the months, you felt like you really grasped the language quite quickly.
Sure.
Now, it's actually quite interesting because as I was saying, code switching is actually quite frequent in adults and in children. But what's interesting is that for children, they usually code switch because there's lexical gaps in their language. So exactly what you just said.
Yes.
Where your language has a word, but it cannot be expressed using English words, right? So it doesn't transfer, right? So the Japanese word doesn't transfer correctly into the English word. So that's actually quite common. So we can go back to this and say this is a misconception, right? Although we code switch, but you're aware that one is Japanese and one is in English,
for sure, yeah.
right? And another thing is that when you're code switching for adult bilingual speakers, code switching actually means that you have a high linguistic competence and that you're extremely aware of the language you're using. There you have it. So code switching is not a form of confusion. Well, anyways, thank you, Karen, for coming in. So parents, we have to remember that children have this remarkable ability to learn languages effectively and quickly. Therefore, you should take advantage of the fact that your child can naturally pick up on languages at such a young age. So you should not fear that speaking a second language at home will cause a disadvantage in the classroom. You have to consider that when children are developing their language, there are two things that needs to be involved. One is that they must have exposure to the language, and two, they must have a need for the language. So let's say if a child speaks English at home with you and your spouse, but then you put that child into a French immersion school, they start to realize that French is the language that they're using in the classroom. So your child will eventually start to know that in order to interact in their own world, in order to communicate with their peers, in order to communicate with their teachers, they will, no doubt, learn how to speak French because there's a desire and there's a need to speak French. There's also a common myth regarding bilingual children that they tend to have a speech delay. But this is also false. The majority of people are actually not really educated about bilingual speakers. So they just assume that learning two different languages will cause a language delay in one of the other languages. Realistically, if a bilingual speaker was having a speech delay, they would have that speech delay even if they were a monolingual speaker. Therefore, your child being bilingual does not mean that they're at a disadvantage. There's actually quite a lot of advantages to being bilingual. As someone who wants to become a teacher, I encourage students to come in and speak their native language or provide their own cultural knowledge in the classroom. The idea is that it's important that educators work towards making an inclusive and safe place for the students. In the end, parents, don't worry if you think your child's second language will cause a speech delay or confusion. Teach your child your language, since you might think you're doing them a favor, but in reality, they're just confused on why you never taught them in the beginning when they had the opportunity. Thank you, everyone, and also thank you, Ken, for coming in and talking about bilingualism and the misconceptions regarding bilingualism and students.